Hey guys, what's going on? It's Mr. Cole. So for this lecture, make sure that you please follow along with me and take notes because we will be using this information tomorrow. So this lecture is about prohibition and the way that life was changing in the 1920s. It's a time of a lot of change where a lot of the social norms that were part of our culture begin to change. And the first way that it does this is through something called prohibition. And that's what we are going to focus on today. What prohibition is the prohibiting of alcohol. So the banning of alcohol. And prohibition really develops from a struggle between rural and urban life. There were these giant parties that would go on in the urban city, and there's a lot of people who are making a lot of money within the city. But we learned yesterday that really a lot of that was superficial, and that for farmers, life does not get easier in the 1920s. Farmers are making less money, and so there's kind of a unofficial conflict and a pulling between the values of the city and the values of rural life. And we'll talk more about what the parties of the 1920s would be like tomorrow. But prohibition comes from this struggle. So eventually, it's part of the progressive movement to get the 18th Amendment passed, which banned the manufacture and the sale of alcohol. It made alcohol legal. This developed because many people, especially very fundamentalist Christians, believe that liquor and alcohol led to poverty and crime, so we needed to get rid of it. Okay? Now, what the government on top of this passed what's called the Volstead Act. And what the Volstead Act did was create a government agency whose job it was to enforce prohibition. So the Volstead Act would do is it created this commission, these agents who would go around and try to investigate and find where people were drinking alcohol or selling alcohol. So you see on here what this is are called speakeasies. Because alcohol was now illegal and people are still going to end up drinking, people go to hidden saloons and hidden nightclubs, and these take the name of speakeasies. What you had to do is you had to use a password to get in, and people would even create their own moonshine, their own liquor out of their own in their own house. Now, from prohibition also really develops organized crime, and that is because people were not going to be willing to give up alcohol. And so because of this, crime and criminals step in and become the distributor of alcohol. And this is where we see the modern version of the mob and the mafia. You may have seen, I'm sure there's plenty of movies made about the mafia and the mob. And these developed because of prohibition. And what they were bootleggers. They would smuggle alcohol in from other countries, primarily from a Caribbean country or from Canada. And they would hide the alcohol in their car, and they would try to deliver that alcohol and make a lot of money for smuggling it into the country. The most famous one of these bootleggers, his name is Al Capone. And Al Capone was a Chicago gangster who became the biggest symbol of organized crime. He made, I think, over $65 million a year from his enterprise. And he dominates Chicago alcohol trade because he just starts killing off his competition. You see a lot of fights between gangs trying to compete for the alcohol trade. And Al Capone was the most famous of these. He's almost impossible to arrest for this, even though there are multiple murders that he was tied to. He had the judges and the police in his back pocket where they did not arrest him for those crimes. So there's a picture of Al Capone. Al was not exactly someone who would hide. He was out in the open, but he was always just slightly covering up his dealings so that he wouldn't get arrested. Now, as you can imagine, prohibition is ridiculous. Okay, it's very unpopular, and it's impossible to enforce. Right? It made something that is drinking a lot, drinking to excess good? No, it's not. But when you make something and you prohibit it like this, people are still going to do it, and people are going to find ways to do it. And so, because of the rise in crime that happened, because of the prohibition is very unpopular, and the Great Depression also comes about, which leads to the 21st Amendment, which repealed prohibition. It was signed in 1933 So the 21st Amendment is the only amendment to repeal another one. So the 18th put prohibition in, and the 21st says, actually, the 18 is not true. You are allowed drinking alcohol. So it repealed the 18th Amendment. So overall, we're going to learn way more about prohibition tomorrow. So I'm just going to hold off a little bit, have a short one today. But that is the prohibition lecture. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.